One of the most courageous and brilliant stars to ever enter Hollywood, Jodie Foster was the eternal soul of American cinema. Clarice Starling, who was unstoppable in The Silence of the Lambs, and the child star who dazzled everyone in Taxi Driver. She became well known in both movie history and the hearts of people everywhere. Growing up in a family that had experienced loss and absence, she became a symbol of strength and intelligence. A two-time Academy Award winner, and a voice that has resonated with generations. Her unrivaled intelligence, strong personality, and unflinching dignity made her more than just an actress. She became the subject of the story, demonstrating that talent is not limited to old age. However, beneath that gleaming pride lies a battlefield rife with horrific injuries. For 40 years, her fears kept her awake at night, as she lived on the brink of death at times. At age 62, she underwent a significant transformation that startled her fans. Just when they believed the worst was over, and she could at last feel at ease once more. You will weep over Jodie Foster's fate. Before we begin, remember to click the like button in remembrance of a life full of storms. However, red carpets and Oscars were not the beginning of Jodie Foster's life. Her mother was struggling to raise 4 children in a tiny Los Angeles home after her father abandoned them before she was born, so there was initially heartbreak. The date of Jodie's birth was November 19, 1962. The younger child of Bud, Cindy, and Connie. Her mother was pregnant when her father, Lucius Foster, a real estate agent and former Air Force colonel, abandoned her. Evelyn Brandy Foster found raising 4 children alone to be extremely difficult. Every day they battled in a tiny home where the only thing worth valuing was sacrifice. She was left with an unbreakable silence because she had no father, an invisible wound that plagued her throughout her life. In order to prevent her children from becoming depressed, Brandy gave them more than money: smarts, courage, and strength. Like lightning in a bottle, Jodie took it all in. At the age of 9 months, she was able to speak in complete sentences. By the age of 3, she was able to read independently. She read books far above her reading level when she was 4 years old. The doctors were astounded by her intelligence. The word gifted was spoken by teachers in a low voice. This little girl's voice was unusually sure and calm, and even her older siblings listened. A family friend named Joe gave her the nickname Jodie, which quickly replaced her given name, Alicia Christian Foster. It seemed as though fate was altering who she was. But there's always a price for brilliance. Laughing on the playground should have been enjoyable, but instead there were tryouts and practices. Childhood seemed to be coming to an end before it had begun. I worked before I understood what it meant to play. And after many years, Jodie would honestly say, "I never really had a childhood." The sad reality that brilliance was born from a sacrifice that was too great for a child to bear was revealed by that statement. When Jodie was just 3 years old in 1965, a talent agent chose her for a sunscreen commercial. In the United States, the image of a girl wearing a swimsuit while a puppy tugged at it gained widespread fame. But behind that adorable photo was a sad reality. She was no longer a child. She brought in the cash. Over the course of the following 18 months, her innocence gradually diminished as her face appeared in nearly 30 advertisements. By the time she was 4, she was earning more than her mother, so a trust fund had to be established to hold her money. The little girl had to bear the burden of survival when she should have been following kites in the park. She made her television debut on Mayberry RFD when she was 5 years old, and by the time she was 13, she had appeared in over 50 shows. Her professionalism and the fact that a child could endure fatigue and fevers without complaining astounded the producers. The truth, however, was cruel. This type of punishment was not your choice. It was necessary, Foster herself remarked. Even when I was a little girl, I was always the grown-up in the room. Jodie Foster's early years were a tale of a girl who needed to be intelligent to survive. A home riddled with loss and a father's absence. Play gave way to performance. Her talent became both her crown and her cross, and she had to lose her innocence. Jodie Foster was under a lot of pressure from Hollywood in 1972. On the set of Napoleon and Samantha, she had to deal with a trained cat. What should have been a lovely moment suddenly became a frightening one. She fell and suffered injuries to her side and back as a result of the animal's erratic movements. The set was locked down as soon as the team rushed to her defense. She suffered from severe pain and nightmares that plagued her for years as a result of the accident. "I had nightmares about that lion for a long time," Jodie would subsequently remark softly. "I was unable to close my eyes because it was so obvious. Nevertheless, 3 days later, she returned to the set, still in bandages but eager to see the film through to completion. It was heartwarming and inspirational to see her standing in front of the camera while she was still recovering. Hollywood commended her professionalism, but beneath all the applause was a harsh reality. Bravery wasn't a decision. The circumstances demanded that kind of toughness. Another delay occurred during the production of Tom Sawyer the following year. Jodie fell during a trick and broke her wrist. She refused to give up on the part, despite the excruciating pain. She persevered, concealing her suffering with a smile, and discovered how to transform suffering into performance. In front of the camera, Becky Thatcher appeared vibrant, but behind it was an actor who had experienced a lot at such a young age. It was no accident that these things occurred. They quietly taught me that showmanship frequently took precedence over safety in Hollywood. Although they needed time to recover, the emotional experience remained with them. How much it cost to develop a job in the harsh studio environment. Then 1976 arrived, the year that would both permanently establish her fame and cast her in even more negative light. Jodie was selected by Martin Scorsese to portray Iris in Taxi Driver. Iris is an adult and challenging character in a story. Jodie underwent hours of psychological testing prior to the shooting to determine her ability to cope with the stress. Strict safety precautions were implemented by the California Labor Board, and her older sister Connie took over to shield her from the most challenging passages in the script. The price was real, though. She was more frightened by the clothes she wore than by the story's passion or its words. She nearly started crying because of certain things that were affecting her happiness and general well-being. Years later, she finally said, "I would hold back tears because I had to wear those stupid costumes." Jodie Foster received widespread praise for her talent and an Academy Award nomination when the film was released. She had the soul of an elderly actress in a youthful body, according to critics. The depth she brought to the role astounded everyone. Although Taxi Driver brought fame, it also left scars that would never completely go away. There wasn't a golden staircase leading Jodie Foster to the top of Hollywood. Rather, it was a long, difficult climb, with fear, loss, and exhaustion at every turn. Disney comedies like Freaky Friday made her laugh when she was a teenager, while darker films like The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane made her appear much older than she actually was. She was obviously no longer a child. She was praised for her versatility, but it came at a high cost. She gave up her youth for parts that made her feel outdated. Her talent had brought her to Italy for Casoto and France for Mua and Fleur Bleue by the late 1970s. She spoke languages other than her own, sang songs in other languages, and played orphans and scammers in movies like Kanshu. Although there was applause, there was quiet behind the curtain. Despite being a teenager and far from home, she walked like an adult. She subsequently claimed that the early years had made her feel older than she actually was, as if the youth's simplicity had been lost, and a forced toughness had taken its place. Then, not just sadness, but the moment that should have marked the end of her life arrived. The 1981 attack on President Ronald Reagan, which was carried out by a person who subsequently claimed to have ties to her. Jodie wasn't at fault. However, she became a figure that was constantly in the news overnight. While she was at Yale, the government kept an eye on her. Her college room had a phone line that led directly to the FBI, stronger glass in the windows, and agents outside. She once claimed that the attention and fear she experienced nearly caused her to drop out of school 17 times in the first year. Even on stage, she was in danger. She was so frightened by something that occurred in the audience that she didn't visit a theater for 40 years. Jodie was living in a very safe but constrained environment, at a time when other children her age were beginning to gain their independence. Things beyond her control altered her youth. Magna cum laude, her thesis on Toni Morrison, was completed in 1985. This demonstrated her intelligence outside of acting. Hollywood, however, had rejected it. She was deemed a business risk by casting directors. At 63 tryouts, not much was visible. After putting away the completed photos, her savings nearly ran out. She attended therapy 3 times a week because she needed to in order to survive. Not because she was weak. It was cruel to tell someone who was once praised as a genius that she was finished before she was even 30, and not many people could take it. Then came the major advance. Director Jonathan Kaplan pushed for her to be paid even though the studio said she couldn't for 7 months. The role of Sarah Tobias wasn't particularly noteworthy. She was genuine, flawed, and scarred. Jodie sent Sarah every attack, scar, and rejection she had experienced as a child, putting all of her own suffering into her. She stood on the Oscar stage in 1989 with the golden statue in her hand for reasons other than her talent. After being told it wasn't good enough, it saved a soul. 2 years later, Jodie Foster landed the role that made her one of the greatest actresses of her era in The Silence of the Lambs. Her portrayal of Clarice Starling wasn't particularly glamorous. Rather, she was a young lady fighting trauma, fear, and the male-dominated corridors of power. Jodie put in a lot of training with the FBI while managing the demands of the role. She practiced with actual agents, studied criminal profiling, and even endured physically taxing drills. It was a big success, and in 1992, at the age of 29, she won her second Oscar. According to some critics, Clarice was the greatest character in a film. However, Jodie's fame was tempered by her weariness. She felt as though the darkness she had previously carried was armor. She knew it was made from wounds that had never completely healed, but people called it brightness. She was at the pinnacle of her fame by the mid-1990s and refused to stop. She managed a demanding schedule while directing Little Man Tate, which demonstrated her intelligence as a child. Nell absorbed so much of herself in 1994 that it caused physical pain. To become a woman who had never been exposed to society, she lost weight, braved freezing water, went to the mountains alone, and invented a new language. Jodie later claimed that returning to her regular life was difficult, despite the fact that her performance garnered her praise and another Oscar nomination. In order to tell stories about women, being strong, and being alone, all of which were very important to her, she soon founded Egg Pictures. This was the pinnacle of Jodie Foster's life, not just accolades and recognition. Every Oscar and standing ovation was accompanied by sobs of loss, anxiety, and ongoing pressure. She persevered through each storm, unharmed but unbroken. Her notoriety was genuine. Those who experienced it demonstrated that suffering that is endured, transformed, and managed with dignity can lead to greatness. Jodie Foster's Oscar-winning stunts were incredible, but she longed for a calm, steady love that the industry could never provide her when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience stopped applauding. When she met Sydney Bernard on the set of Summersby in 1993, her desire was fulfilled. After decades of storms, Bernard, a production planner, found refuge in her unflinching kindness and serene strength. Their bond was quiet and private, unlike the red carpets and flashing cameras. It was quiet, private, and very authentic. Jodie at last found a person who saw her as a woman seeking peace, rather than as a genius or a famous person. She had endured years of intense scrutiny and applause, which frequently felt meaningless. "Sydney kept me grounded," she considered once. "She made me feel at home when everything else was noise." Friends recalled how Jodie's eyes would light up when she entered the room, saying, "Those years were like sunlight on still water for Bernard, too." How she described her as a partner she truly liked, rather than as an icon. In private, Sydney once remarked that Jodie was the most intelligent and compassionate person she had ever encountered. They created a world that was warm within their walls but difficult for outsiders to see. Their laughter filled otherwise silent kitchens that smelled of simple food. They walked their dogs late at night, discussed future plans in hushed tones, and shared books in low light. All of these were indications of their contentment. As a 2-time Oscar winner, Jodie was well known, but to Sydney and their kids she was simply Mom. When their first son, Charlie, was born in 1998, Jodie herself described it as the most profound joy of my life. Carrying him herself, she went to the hospital under a false identity to protect their safe haven. After 3 years, Kid arrived and seemed to provide a lasting sense of completeness. Sydney supported them during their first bedtime stories, sleepless nights, and all the lovely chaos of family life that turned their hidden home into a loving universe. However, Jodie found motherhood to be both enjoyable and challenging. In order to prevent reporters from taking pictures of her children, she annually spent a lot of money on schools. She used several layers of legal protection, kept changing her email address, and refused to reveal the identity of the children's father. According to one of her quotes, "My sons will know the truth when they are ready." 2 loving women are raising their children and defending their happiness like a small flame against a powerful wind in this 14-year-old secret love story that was marked with the words, "Not when the public demands it." "We were a family," Jodie subsequently stated in an interview. "That was what mattered most." But even very strong walls can turn into bars. The silence they had chosen to protect their love slowly became too heavy for them to carry. What had felt safe at first turned out to be suffocation, and conversations that used to go smoothly became hesitant. People hardly ever laughed anymore, but Jodie did because she sorely needed her privacy. Sydney, however, desired sunlight in order to make her life less secret. They were both correct. The distance was still too great to overcome. After nearly 15 years together, they called it quits in 2008. Jodie had a horrible time. She later claimed that she felt as though a significant portion of her life had been taken away because of the breakup. Sydney's grief was equally profound but quieter. The silence had finally prevailed, though the love had not vanished. They remained together despite their sadness, not because they were in love, but rather because they were devoted to Charlie and Kit. They chose co-parenting over separation and kindness over rage. A tragedy of circumstances rather than a decision, Jodie once remarked. Our kids kept us together in the ways that really mattered. Their love story wasn't over because of betrayal. It was over because of the slow loss of privacy. It was a love that was brilliant in the private sphere, where it created a home, reared children, and provided a haven from the outside world, but it was unable to withstand the unrelenting weight of silence. Perhaps that is the most profound reality about humans, and that some of the greatest loves aren't those that endure forever, but rather those that leave both painful and lovely wounds on the soul. Thoughts of love that, even in its loss, were genuine, radiant, and timeless in their own unique way. Following the breakup of her 14-year relationship with Sydney Bernard, Jodie once more found herself in the background. She kept the outside world at bay and clung to her kids. Love had been her refuge, but now it was no longer there. Even the longest nights eventually give way to dawn. At the Golden Globes, a new day began in 2013. 20 years of silence ended when Jodie Foster took the stage to accept the Cecil B. DeMille Award. When she spoke, she wasn't upset and didn't say anything aloud. Instead, she spoke with the trembling ease of someone who has spent too much time in hiding. She grinned wryly and said, "I came out 1,000 years ago." It was impossible to forget when her voice became rough and genuine. If you had been a public figure since you were a toddler, if you had to fight for a life that felt real, then maybe you too might value privacy above all else. That's when the room stopped. Many saw it as just another thank you speech. For Jodie, it meant freedom. A life that had been kept hidden suddenly came to light. That light grew brighter after a year. Jodie discreetly wed the gifted actor and photographer Alexandra Hedison in 2014. The news didn't cover their romance. With the assistance of two women who had experienced both joy and sorrow, it flourished in peaceful areas. Jodie's toughness complemented Alexandra's softness, and her steadiness reminded me more of safety than showmanship. For the first time, Jodie didn't have to conceal or alter the truth to satisfy a harsh company. The wedding wasn't the only event. It was a healing act, the silence followed by the appearance of light. Jodie's friends ultimately claimed that Alexandra had told her something she was unaware of the entire time. Calm. Their Beverly Hills home, with its brightly lit rooms and the walls covered in Hedison's eerily stunning photographs, evolved into more than just a home. It was a secure location. Quiet routines began each morning. Jodie was reading in the corner while Alexandra was brewing coffee. On the floor, the dogs were pacing quietly. Everyone chuckled around the dinner table at the end of the day. Charlie and Kit, Jodie's children, who had been raised with the affection of two mothers, frequently joined in. Just love and family, no video cameras, no parts to play. It was Jodie's life returned, not a show. Jodie's first and second great loves differed not in intensity, but in the freedom they gave her. Alexandra once remarked of her, "She carries the weight of the world with such grace, and yet, in our home, she is simply herself, tender, playful, free." She concealed her happiness from the world by secretly starting a family with Sydney Bernard. That love was genuine, but it was always cloaked in mystery and lived behind closed doors. She could now live her life without fear, or having to apologize thanks to Alexandra. Jodie once remarked softly, "Alexandra gave me the courage to breathe in the sun. It feels like home to me when I'm with her. I don't feel like I'm hiding." There, love served as a gentle reminder that you don't need permission to be happy. not as a protest. Themes of being seen and not seen, of being close and far away, are frequently present in Alexandra's artwork. As Jodie attempted to strike a balance between what the outside world desired and what her soul desired to display, these concepts appeared to mirror her own journey. Together, they arrived at a balance. Together, they made the decision to go public only when they felt compelled to do so. It was a silent protest against the cacophony of celebrity culture, and they were able to be viewed on their own terms. Jodie always prioritized her role as a mother throughout it all. She kept Charlie and Kit out of the spotlight by paying schools to keep the paparazzi away and using false names in hospitals. She took this action in order to spare her boys from the issues she had experienced since she was a young girl. She found a partner in Alexandra who was aware of her love for him and would support her as a friend and mentor rather than a stand-in. Their mixed-race family demonstrated the power, enduring nature, and transformative power of all forms of love. Today, neither paparazzi pictures nor tabloid stories recall Jodie Foster's relationship with Alexandra Hedison. Rather, it resides in the silent pride of two women who choose peace over spectacle, raise their children together, and share art. Jodie is finally in the spotlight after decades of being in the background. Love has healed her, but she is still hurt. That might be the most profound reality her journey reveals to us. The greatest battles take place in gardens where people walk hand in hand, in quiet homes where people are laughing, and in the sheer bravery of not wearing a mask. And her love is present in every decision, every smile, and every moment of freedom. It doesn't need to be obvious. That steady, silent glow conceals the greatest victory of all. To finally, completely, and simply be. Not just to act, to remain resilient, or even to succeed. Jodie Foster had seen a different side of love thanks to Alex Hedison. However, no amount of love can shield us from life's ultimate reality. We will eventually lose something. After decades of storms, Jodie had at last found a home, a partner, and a family that would never change. As she was growing accustomed to being outside and breathing freely, however, life reminded her of its cruelty in ways worse than being rejected for a job or being observed by many people. Her father, Lucius Foster, passed away in 2016 following years of illness and worsening health. However, the sadness made things difficult. His presence had never really been felt by Jodie. A respected colonel in the Air Force, he had left to become a broker before she was even born. They only crossed paths a few times in her life. There was more interest than intimacy, and each meeting was courteous but distant. She wasn't upset about the end of a close relationship when her family informed her of his passing. It was the silent agony of the past. She missed the years that had gone by, the conversations that had not taken place, and the father-daughter bond that had never been established, in addition to the man. She once reflected on how odd it is to grieve for someone who was never truly yours. Instead of loud sobs, the pain lingered in the silence of unsolved questions and the shadow of an embrace she had never experienced. Storms were nothing new to Jodie Foster, but they were all new to her after she lost her mother, Evelyn Brandy Foster, in 2019. Through all of them, her mother had supported her. Brandy was not just a mother. After being abandoned, she reared 4 children alone and served as both their mother and father. Jodie's mother has been by her side ever since she can remember. The one who, when her nerves were getting the better of her, stood just off camera in her first commercial, pulling her collar up and whispering encouraging words. The woman who prepared lunches before sunrise and stayed up past midnight to rehearse her lines was adamant that her daughter's gift would remain unutilized.